getting ready for this conference, and I'm so happy to see everybody. We have a full house, and I'll let you know we have 100 people on a waiting list. And we have some who came in, learned yesterday that we had some cancellations, so we were especially glad that some people let us know. And we're grateful to donors who have made this program possible. As you know, there are no fees attached for this for you, and it's a gift to you from Nashville and for Nashville. People who gave are people here in your community. They are anonymous and want to be that way right now, but we are looking forward to coming back here with more programs and building on your skills and inviting you to join us and even doing that and recruiting more people to come in, being presenters yourselves, being on panels as you grow in your knowledge as well. We have here a broad spectrum of work perspective, and we have people who have been survivors and are now thrivers from cults. We have people from law enforcement, we have people from hospitals, we have people from faculty from Vanderbilt, Troy University, I believe, ETSU perhaps, University of Tennessee, and we are really proud to be co-hosting with the University of Tennessee College of Social Work, who has a presence here in Nashville that's strong, as well as a presence in Knoxville. And I'm going to ask everyone to look to your right, and you will see, except for Reagan Sharper, we are bookends. Reagan is my brother-in-law, so he'll be at the end of the day, and I'm at the beginning. But Reagan is the director of graduate programs and has lots of other responsibilities as well in the college. So it's been fun to work with family members as well as a professional to pull this together. First up, I want to ask if anyone is here from Arizona. Is there anyone here from further away than Arizona? No, the presenters don't count. The Arizona person gets our first prize for the morning, and I'm shamelessly giving the book that I wrote first. But we also have some wonderful books that we are going to give away throughout the day. And if I forget that we're doing drawings, yell at me, say, we need a drawing, because we have a number of gifts to give away. I want to tell you that wherever you're sitting now does not have to be where you sit during the lunch hour. For lunch, we're going to work you hard today. And so I want you to know, first of all, please silence your phones. And they don't work in this room anyway, so if you're afraid you're not going to be able to do anything. I discovered that yesterday when we were setting up. But you can go out in the lobby area, and they do work out there. And we realize you will have a built-in break this morning. We won't have one this afternoon, but we have some real good variety, and it'll keep us engaged. But I want you to feel comfortable getting up, and there are 2 exits to go to the restrooms. It's like the airplane, over here and over here, check your emergency exits. And we have food in the back, and the snacks will be there this morning. We'll have lunch coming in. Those of you who have special diets that you told us about, your sack of lunch will be in an end area, a particular area, with your name on it. So you can look for that, and those will be there. If you just walked in cold today, I'll ask you not to get any food until we see who doesn't show up, so that we can be sure people who register are assured food. I think we'll have plenty. What else? Those of you who are getting continuing education units, don't run off quickly at the end of the session. We do want everyone to do evaluation forms for us, and that way we'll get better at what we do. And we also will need those for you, and we need you to sign out. If you did not sign in this morning, during the first break, check by the registration table and be sure we get your signature in. And we will give you your certificates at the end of today to take back. So we're happy you're here to get some credit for this as well. I want to let you know that our presenters hail from seeing who's going to present today. But the others are from places like Delaware, New Jersey, and Austin, Texas. And I want you to be patient with those from the north. They're operating under a serious language handicap. And you may need to say slow down just a tad. My role will be to navigate for you. I'm not presenting a program today, but I will be your buddy, and I will cut people off when the time's over, and I will introduce the next presenters, and I'm here to help you if you have any needs, so give me a shout out. And Ashlyn, would you stand up? Ashlyn is a staff member from the International Cultic Studies Association. We call it ICSA or ICSA. And Ashlyn is here. She's made this happen. I'll tell you what, I would have been in here till this morning setting up. She's just been a superstar from start to end in getting the program together. And so I want to ask you right now to give her a round of applause. And we are videoing all the programs, and they will be available somehow. And I hope you all will, in your programs, which are in your bags, you will see the ICSA home website, and you can go there and you'll be able to get information. We hope you'll maybe register to be a member at some point. And also, the PowerPoint presentations will be available to you after the conference through the website. So, in fact, we will send them to you actually to follow up. So you don't have to scribble. If you want to take photos, that's fine, but we will have them available to you as well digitally. Let me see if I have anything else I have to check my notes. I'm getting a little old. Do you have any questions before we start? I'm going to introduce our first speaker then. We are beginning with kind of square one. Why are we still talking about cults? You know, we thought that was a done deal a long time ago, perhaps, and the flower children like me were going to California. But as you all know by being here, that coercive control and cults in community are very serious to us today. And we're going to start out talking about what is a cult and what is this coercive control we're talking about. And then we'll move to some survivors who tell us through their lenses where they've been going. And then we will have some therapists talk about therapy. And I want to say to you that even if you're not a therapist, our therapists today, all those discussions that center on that will teach us all how to communicate and help with people who've been cult survivors or who are leading even a domestic violence situation or a radicalized youth or a really surly teenager. It will help all of us. And I'm not a therapist. I'll tell you a little bit more about me later on, but I do want to introduce Steve Eichel to kick us off. And I'll tell you, I'm not going to go through the biographies. You have those, and he is incredibly skilled and accomplished. I want to tell you two things that you may not know about Steve. One is he really is a great baker. And we wanted him to bake for us for our food today, but he wasn't agreeable to that. He's a great baker. And you might sometimes ask him, why does he not like peaches? And of course, we don't like peaches because it's Georgia. But he has other reasons for not liking peaches. And I will tell you, when I first started needing to learn about cults, cult survivors said to me, go to ICSA. I said, what is that? And so I went to an ICSA conference and met Steve, and he's president now of ICSA, and has been on television. He's kind of the world expert touch point, and he has taught me so much. And one thing I especially appreciate about Steve is he's a lifelong learner. He's still in college. He has a ton of degrees, but he's still going to school and still loves to learn. And that's something we all need to remember and capture. So help me welcome to the podium Steve Eichel.
Oh, after that introduction, there's nowhere to go but down. Thank you so much, Debbie, and especially I want to give thanks to Ashlyn and Debbie for organizing this, and also Debbie's brother-in-law, Reagan, at the University of Tennessee College of Social Work. The work that they put in to get this all together is just amazing, and it's absolutely warms my heart. I'm so glad we have people like Debbie, because if it were up to me, you would all be in probably 4 or 5 different buildings, different days, and Lord knows what would happen. At any rate, Debbie is actually our newest board member, and to quote somebody else many, many years ago, boy, talk about sticking your thumb in a pie and pulling out a plum. She's just an amazing, amazing person. I'm so glad that we have her working with us. So, as you can see, my goal here today, I could probably, my wife would tell you that I could talk about almost anything for hours, not that it would be worthwhile, but I am a talker. I'm going to try, I have a time limit, I'm going to try to be brief. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions later, and if so, raise your hand, and Ashlyn will provide you with a microphone so that I and other people will be able to hear you. Okay, so I get asked, I've been involved in this field since 1975, and every time I've been on, as Debbie mentioned, I've done a lot of interviews, a lot of public education, a lot of TV and that sort of stuff, and I get asked the same question all the time. I didn't know cults were still around. Because they never left, right? And I understand that. I mean, there's an awful lot of things going on in the world. The vast majority of people, sort of cults are not, number one thing that they're looking out for. There's so many other things going on in the world, so I totally understand that. And we don't hear about cults unless there's a disaster. But I like to refer, I often talk about the cult phenomenon as sort of a form of herpes, It's always there, there's always an outbreak. I mean, you're gonna have an outbreak, but periodically, for long periods of time, it may just sort of be under the surface. And everything looks fine on the surface, but then boom, there's an outbreak. Most people think that, we know what cults are. I get a lot of that from people who, come up, I know this is a cult, that's a cult, etc., etc. A common mistaken belief, as Debbie actually mentioned on another program yesterday, a mistaken belief is that cult members dress weird, they have weird beliefs, only stupid people or gullible people join them, when in fact actually research shows that most members who are involved in cultic groups have high average IQs and often are very well educated. Many, if not most, people's views of cults have been shaped by horror stories about the most dangerous and destructive cults. So, for example, here's a picture of a very sweet boy. Okay, and if you saw this picture, you'd probably go, oh, that's kind of a nice looking kid. And here he is grown up. So that, of course, is a picture of Charles Manson. Here's a picture just of the Manson, the 3 of the women who were part of the Manson family, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten. And of course, most people are also familiar with the People's Temple and what happened there in Guyana. That was on November 18th, 1978. And, oops. In Jonestown, as you know, the leader of that group, of course, was Reverend Jim Jones. 917 people total died in Guyana. 278 of them were children under the age of 10. Of course, U.S. Congressman Leo J. Ryan was assassinated when he came to investigate what was going on at Jonestown. Most people have also heard or aware of the Branch Davidians. April 19th, 1993, in Waco, Texas, their leader was Reverend David, self-proclaimed Reverend David Koresh. 4 agents were killed in that, 6 cultists. As you can see, we're almost at that anniversary there. 80 members then died in a fire in April, including 25 children. A group that probably many of you have not heard of, which is the Order of the Solar Temples, an international cult, over a period of a couple of years in Switzerland, France, and Quebec. There were 2 leaders, and this was, again, a suicide cult. There were 74 total people who died, 53 in 94, 16 in 95, and 5 in 96. So, question. For you folks, I'm not asking you to answer, just think about it. There have been exactly 2 bioterror attacks in the United States. One, of course, involved the infamous anthrax letters sent in 2000, right after 9/11, and that resulted in 5 deaths. What was the other and the larger attack? Well, that was in the Dallas in Oregon by a group known as the Rajneeshis. They poisoned the water supply there and poisoned 751 people. Fortunately, I don't think anyone died. And that was an attempt to get people, they wanted people to be too sick to vote so that they can then take over the city council. So those were followers of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. That group is now known as Osho. And the attack is one of only 2 confirmed terrorist uses of biological weapons to harm United States citizens to date. Hopefully, the last one. Some of you may be familiar with this nice-looking gentleman. He's the leader of a Japanese cult known as Amshrinkyo. This was a particularly destructive group. They were an Armageddon-related group. They were attempting, based in Tokyo, they were attempting actually to procure nuclear weapons. They were unable to do that, but they were able to obtain sarin gas, poison gas. The leader eventually was convicted and sentenced. As of 2015, I don't know if I should look into this, but I hadn't looked into it since then, as to whether or not the leader actually had been executed, but he was sentenced to death. And the sarin gas was released in the Tokyo subway. 12 people died as a result, and 5,500 people were injured. Robert J. Lifton, a very well-known psychiatrist, probably the foremost expert in the world on thought reform and quote-unquote brainwashing, wrote a book about what happened through Amshrinkyo, Destroying the World to Save It. And this was 1999, so he was predicting at that time that there would be new global terrorism that is cult-based. I'm not going to go through this, but one of the things he said was it may be the only one group in a loosely connected, still developing global subculture of apocalyptic violence. There was a book review by Nicholas Kristof in which he kind of questioned Lifton's conclusions there. But of course, and one of the things he said was, I'm also unconvinced that cults are quite as dangerous as Lifton seems to suggest. This was in 1999. 2 years later, this. A lot of us, myself included, feel very strongly that essentially groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh, most of you know Daesh as ISIS or ISIL. I prefer the pejorative term that is used in the Middle East, Daesh. These are essentially large, well-funded, cultic groups with a lot of weapons. What distinguishes them from Jim Jones is the number of people involved and the destructiveness of the weaponry that they have. So, what is a cult? One of the terms that, the term cult is a difficult one, and we've tried for the last, 40 years to get people away from that term, and I think we finally just caved and said, you know what, that's the term people use, and so we have done that as well. But actually, I prefer the term, I prefer 2 terms. One is a high demand group, and the other, which I'll get into more details, what I refer to as cultic relationships, because I think that's a very important point. We'll get to that in a minute. A lot of us began talking very quickly right after 9/11, and some even before 9/11, about groups like Al-Qaeda and later on Daesh's cults. I wrote an op-ed piece fairly shortly after 9/11 that basically said that. The problem with the term cult is that it has a lot of different meanings. It has a religious meaning, it has a popular meaning, it has sort of a more scientific meaning. So for example, people use terms like, well, there's the Elvis cult, the various cults of personality. And that's very different from what we're talking about here. That's not the same thing. Theologians will talk about how Christianity started off as a cult. as a break-off cult from Judaism. And again, that's not the same way that we're using the term cult. I wish we could, if it were up to me, I would just have everyone use the term something like high demand group, but I'm not that good of a brainwasher, so I get that. And in addition, one of the things that we've talked about a lot over the years is the idea that there are one-to-one cultic relationships. And that's also important, especially for those of you who work in the fields related to intimate partner violence, i.e. domestic violence. Anyone, if you're familiar with the Duluth model of coercive control, with their permission, we've adapted that to illustrate how that model reflects actually very well what happens in cultic dynamics. That's in your packet, you'll be able to see that. So, is Daesh a cult? As I mentioned, the difference is the number of members and the quantity and sophistication of the weaponry. This is, of course, an infamous picture of the people who were beheaded by members of Daesh. So, in general, when I use the term cult, I'm talking about an ideological organization that's held together by charismatic relationships, typically between followers and a leader, but not always. Sometimes it's followers and other followers, or followers and people sort of in the middle level of the movement. Many, especially in the larger groups, a lot of members may not have ever met the cult leader, and may never meet the cult leader, except through maybe social media and other forms of communication means. But it's held together by charismatic relationships, and it demands high levels of commitment, and that's, of course, very important. Typically, they have rigid hierarchies. The leader is considered either flawless or divine or has a special gift. If it's a political cult, it may be that the leader is seen as having a special take on world history and on politics and economics that is above and beyond anything that anyone else has ever had. Typically, in larger groups, there's an inner circle, or sort of a second tier. That group often hides information from the more general membership. There's a clear downward flow of information and power. And of course, in groups that are at least nominally democratic, the flow of power and information is two ways. So there's a flow that comes from the membership up to the leadership, one would hope, and a flow that comes from the leadership down to the membership. In cultic groups, it's a one-way flow. Very rigid boundaries. Anything or anyone outside of the group is typically demonized in some way. If it's a psychotherapy cult, people who are not involved in that particular cult are, they're all dysfunctional, or they're all addicts of some kind. So there's a clear distinction between those who are in the group and those who are outside of the group. Thought control themes and processes, which I'll get into shortly, is a central feature of these groups as well. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of high demand groups or cults, and I'm just going to go over them very briefly. The one that most people, especially these days, might be familiar with, and especially in certain areas of the United States. I'm not just talking about the South. Delaware has its own little Bible Belt as well. But typically, a lot of groups, of course, are religious cults. They're Bible-based. They're typically fundamentalists. All right. So whether it's Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Buddhist, these are groups that will take literally whatever the theology tells them. There are political cults. They typically are revolutionary. They can be on the left, they can be on the right, they can be anarchist and libertarian oriented, like the Freemen. There's a Christian identity movement, which I call actually a hybrid movement. Marketing cults. Right? That engage in, for example, multi-level marketing. They often incorporate religious or New Age beliefs and practices. Therapy and pseudotherapy related cults. A group that I and a few others, and we're very glad that we closed down outside of Philadelphia. It was a psychotherapy cult called Genesis Associates in New York City. There were the Sullivanians, and the amount of damage these groups do is really, it's incredible. I could spend hours just talking about that. Typically, the therapists in these types of groups encourage dependency, dread, and debilitation. We'll get into that hopefully a little later. And then there are the more New Age oriented groups. The one that has been in the news over the past year or so is NXIVM. And then there are hybrid, what I refer to as hybrid cults. They tend, for example, they blend self-help and religion. So there's a woman who leads a particular cultic group who made a fortune on a diet that she proposed, but it was all, the diet was based on basically prayer and belief in her interpretation of Christianity. Political and therapeutic. There are some groups that are both political and therapeutic. And there's a dynamic there that's interesting that I might not have time to get into, but essentially those groups focus on both the individual member of the group, that you've got to be rehabilitated, you've got to be liberated internally, consciousness raised, et cetera, and then of course they also have very strong negative feelings toward people outside the group. And then there are religious/political cultic groups. These are groups that may be oriented toward a particular religious belief, but what they're doing is they're very deeply involved in the political aspects of their community or even of the country. The most common right now, as far as we can tell, is are the fundamentalist Christian and or Bible-based high-demand groups. How many people, we get asked this all the time, how many people are involved in cults? And the real answer to that is we just don't know. Best estimate is that about 1% of the United States population, which right now would be about 3 million people, have been involved in cultic groups, and perhaps 100,000 people enter and leave cultic groups each year. Similar percentages have been found in studies in parts of Europe, especially in Spain. The members of, numbers I'm citing do not include many thousands of people who are in destructive relationships, like abusive marriages and families, that employ cult-like processes. And then, of course, there are business and business leaders who demonstrate cult-like tendencies and behaviors. In my practice right now, probably the most damaged person I'm working with is somebody who is involved in a very large corporation in my area that apparently seems to be employing some very cultic kinds of processes. He is on permanent disability now with severe PTSD. So I've seen that, and probably some of you have known that as well, have seen that as well. The vast majority of cults are small, and they're relatively harmless to people outside of the group. One of the things that concerns me, and concerns a lot of folks involved in this field, is distinguishing between groups that are compound-based versus those that are not based in compounds. And compound, of course, I'm talking about cult members who live all together. It actually may be a compound with fences and guards, such as the Tony Lamo cult. These groups are the ones that concern me the most, because historically and from a dynamic point of view, they tend to be the most dangerous ones. That's where we hear about the suicides, the murders, severe sexual abuse, etc., especially for children. I'm not going to get into my personal views of how children are, how this country is more interested in protecting someone's ability to misinterpret the Bible than they are interested in protecting the lives of children. But that's a whole other topic. The big problem with compounds, especially, is the near total isolation that members experience. So let me break down a little bit of the dynamic, the characteristics of cultic relationships. And I prefer to use the term cultic relationships because I think over many decades there's a belief that the people who become involved in cults are sort of passive sponges that just absorb the indoctrination. Sit there and just kind of absorb it in. And that's just not true. It's an active interpersonal kind of thing. It's an active interpersonal process. So I prefer to think in terms of cultic processes rather than cultic groups per se. But at any rate, here are some characteristics and some processes that should be concerned, that we are often concerned about. One, of course, is most cults have a highly charismatic leader. And so charisma is an extremely important point. It usually refers to a special spiritual power or some other quality that gives the leader an ability to influence or authority over large numbers of people. Awe and fervor. Now, this is something that's relatively new in cultic theory, if you will. I'm not going to get into all of that, but I'll just mention that on fervor refer to an emotional experience that is overwhelming and unusual. So a lot of people who become involved in cults have this kind of experience. It's induced, or at least the cultic group tends to want to induce that kind of relationship, that kind of experience in people, in new recruits. So typically, as a result of awe and fervor, the individual develops an intense emotional commitment to a group, cause, or movement, which is fervor. So some of you, of course, there's at least one table topic, I believe, about why don't people leave groups, and even when they're presented with clear information that this group is doing A, B, C, and D, and they're highly destructive, they're even against your own group's principles and beliefs. Nevertheless, the emotional commitment is what keeps them, some of these folks, involved in the groups, even when they know that there's something awful going on with them. Of course, our concern is, what is the risk of harm? High demand leader-centered social climate places such groups at risk of exploiting and injuring members, even though if the leadership doesn't abuse its power, some groups remain relatively benign. It's often true that we get calls from a loved one or a family member, a spouse, sometimes children, adult children who are calling out their parents. They perceive that the group exhibits one or more of these kinds of characteristics. First of all, it treats people as objects to be manipulated. It believes that and behaves as though the group's supposed noble ends justify the means, right? So it's the ends justifies the means argument. And it does harm at least some people involved with or affected by the group. I want to talk a little bit about the issue of harm. Not everyone is harmed in these groups. In fact, there are a few people who probably their lives prior to becoming involved in the group were such a mess, and they actually experienced, at least temporarily, a benefit to being involved in these groups. And I want to be clear about that. Not everybody involved in these groups, in cultic groups, has been quote-unquote brainwashed. Not everyone experiences harm. One of the more interesting experiences I had was observing a deprogramming, this is over 30 years ago, of two young men who were involved with the Hare Krishnas at that time, the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, and they didn't want to leave the group. And the reason they didn't want to leave the group is because they were involved in, and ISKCON is known to have done this, they were involved in transporting drugs from India to the United States in hollowed out idols. And what these two guys were doing is they were skimming. It was mostly cocaine and heroin, and they were skimming it off the top and making a lot of money themselves. So there was they didn't believe in the philosophy, they were essentially faking it. It was just, a way for them to enrich themselves. They were basically sociopaths. And you can't deprogram sociopaths. You can't really program them either, for that matter. But that's just an example of how it's true. Not everyone in these groups is being harmed. However, what I like to remind people is that you don't, when the FDA examines the medication and denies it, right? It's not because everyone's being harmed by that medication. You hit a certain level, 5–10% of people who have serious side effects, negative side effects from that medication, the FDA is not going to approve it. And that's how I feel toward cultic groups. It's not that every group is awful all the time to everyone, but they are bad enough to enough people, in my opinion, to merit the kind of deep concern that we have. So I mentioned Robert J. Lifton earlier. Psychiatrist, by the way, those of you who have heard of the term survivor guilt, he's the one who coined that. His first study was of the survivors of the Hiroshima atomic bombing in World War II. So yeah, he's older than I am. So some of the themes that he found, and we apply this now, and he applies this to cultic groups, but this was actually based on his research of Chinese communist re-education camps, okay, and also North Korean, quote-unquote, brainwashing of American soldiers during the Korean War. And what he found were these 8 sort of seminal characteristics of thought reform. He wasn't talking about cults at the time, he was talking about thought reform or brainwashing programs. And the first is milieu control. I'm going to, rather than go through this, I'll put it this way. Milieu control involves the control of information and communication both within the group and between the group and folks outside the group. That's extremely important. Information control is vital. Mystical manipulation. All right, so there's a manipulation of experiences so that they seem to be spontaneous, but in fact they're planned and orchestrated by the group and its leaders in order to demonstrate divine authority or spiritual advancement or some other kind of special gift or talent. So my first involvement in the cult-related field was when I did a participant observation as a independent study social psychology project when I was an undergraduate, and I allowed myself to get recruited by the Unification Church, the Moonies, and I underwent their 1-week intensive indoctrination program. What made, I would say about 2/3 of the people in my workshop were so enthusiastic. They were, oh, this is wonderful, this is great, and they were presented to us as though they were new recruits like me. No, they'd been members for years, and they were pretending to be new recruits, and they were drumming up our excitement, right? Because again, awe and fervor, you need to have that, or it's preferable to have that. The demand for purity, all right? The world is viewed in very black and white terms. Members are constantly exhorted to conform to the ideology of the group and to strive for perfection. Shame is typically used extensively as a way of controlling these members. Confession, demand that you have to confess everything and anything that the group says, at least, or believes that you've done wrong. Sacred science, the belief that sacred science refers to the cultic philosophy that is the truth, right? Everything else, other things may approach the truth, but those of you who are familiar, for example, with Bible-based cults, you know that you can have two Bible-based cults, same Bible, same basic belief system, right? But one will say, oh, but we interpret this passage this way, and that's the truth. The other group is completely off their rocker. They claim to be Christians, but they are not, in fact, real Christians. That's the typical kind of thing that we'll hear from people who've been involved in more Bible-based cults. Loading the language. This involves using certain terms that are then perverted and misinterpreted very deliberately. The most common example I can give you is what was probably the most totalitarian state in the world in post-World War II Europe was East Germany. East Germany and the secret police there, the Stasi, were known as just the worst of the worst. They sort of like the North Korea of Europe at that time. But what was the official name of the East German country under Soviet rule? It was the German Democratic Republic. So, we all know what a republic is. We think we know what a republic is. The United States is a republic, right? Republic is a good thing. Democratic is a good thing, right? So here you've got loading the language where the term democratic and republic are completely stripped of their real meaning and instead are misinterpreted through a very strict Marxist kind of lens. Doctrine over person. This is really important. This refers to the fact that in cultic groups, the cult's interpretation of your experience or of your beliefs supersedes anything you may believe or experience. So if you experience sexual abuse by the cult leader and complain about that, they will say, no, that's not. You were chosen for a very special purpose, and that was not sex. That was you were endowed with a very clear spiritual process. You should be grateful to the leader for allowing you to have that experience. So the doctrine of the group supersedes your own personal experience. Really, what are we talking about here? Talking about gaslighting, right? For those who are familiar with the term gaslighting. Dispensing of existence, right? This always amazes me when people, one of the things that people tell me that drew them into a particular group was the experience of what they call unconditional love. No matter, I'm loved purely and simply for myself. It's the first experience I've had of unconditional love, etc., etc. And yes, as long as you obey the group, you'll be loved. That is far from unconditional love. It's actually extremely conditional. So the group decides who has the right to exist, either physically in times, or psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, etc. Now, very importantly, not all these criteria need to be present for a group or a relationship to be cultic, right? As is true with most human characteristics and actions, these exist on a continuum, right? There's a spectrum. One of the things that marks a cultic group is this sort of black and white thinking. It's all good or all bad, right? Those of you who are mental health professionals, it's sort of institutionalized borderline personality disorder, you know? The world is split, all good, all bad. And that can vary, of course. If you're all good, you do something against a cult, now you're all bad. A big problem that I've seen over the years is a tendency for some people in the quote-unquote anti-cult movement to engage in the same kind of thinking. If you're in a cult, or if this is a cult group, it's all bad. And the leaders are all bad. And we are all good. And I think, as I note here, my preference is to leave that kind of black and white thinking to cultists rather than ourselves. Madeline Tobias and Yanya Lalick wrote a book several years ago called Captive Minds, Captive Hearts, Captive Minds. They talk about the similarities between cultic devotion and traumatic bonding. How many of you are familiar with the idea of trauma bonding? Okay, yes, probably, yeah, a fair amount of you. So that's exactly often what happens in cultic groups, especially for people who are born in these groups, and that's a whole other topic, actually. So how does that happen? It happens through early verbal and physical dominance, isolation or imprisonment, fear, arousal, and maintenance, guilt induction, etc., as you can see over there. Very importantly, on the bottom, required secrecy. For those of you who are therapists, how often especially if you're seeing let's say a child or a teenager or a spouse, how many of you hear something about along the lines of, well, you know, my parents want to know what we're talking about here in therapy, or my wife, you know, wants to know what I'm doing in therapy. Okay? That happens a lot among those of us who are therapists. And typically we ask clients, you know, it's really a good idea to keep this private and confidential, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very careful with that because cultic therapists do that, all right? Don't talk to anyone else. This is a special relationship. Don't tell anyone about what's going on here. So what I typically tell people is, sure, you know, use your best judgment. Of course, you can talk to other people about what's going on here. Use your best judgment. Keep in mind that you want to be very careful, et cetera, et cetera. But I will never say, don't talk to anyone about what's going on in therapy. I consider that to be extremely a real red flag for what may eventually be a harmful and, in fact, destructive form of psychotherapy. Margaret Singer, another pioneer in this field, talked about themes and processes in cults, and she talked about how important it is to keep the person unaware of what's going on and changes that are taking place. You want to control the person's time and, if possible, physical environment. Create a sense of powerlessness, covert fear, and dependency. What's paradoxical here is that a lot of people in cultic groups will say that one of the things they love about being in a group is that it empowers them. They feel empowered. Well, that's not what's typically going on within the group. Suppress much of the person's own behavior and attitudes. Instill new behavior and new attitudes. How many of these processes do we find in groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh, the most destructive cultic groups at this particular moment in time? So certainly isolation, processing recruits away from their past lives, all right? Consciousness altering methods, and that can involve hypnotic-like processes, as well as very well-known social psychological techniques like groupthink. Keeping recruits constantly busy and never alone. Boy, I experienced that when I underwent Mooney indoctrination. They had what was called a buddy system, and someone would always accompany you. It was always someone who knew, you know, who's already a member, a committed member. They would accompany you. I got accompanied into the bathroom. All right, the guy who was my buddy actually stood behind me as I was at the urinal, talking, you know, continuing to tell me about how the Unification Church was the only good thing on the planet. Strong focus on the leader, of course. I want to go through, given the time, and kind of go through this. So some of the assumptions underlying our work, especially in the International Cultural Studies Association, ICSA, as our executive director indicated, some groups can harm some people sometimes, and some groups may be more likely to harm people than other groups. That's one of our sort of core assumptions. There may be personal internal factors that are related to people becoming involved, things like, I wish I had more time, but I don't, and so I'm going to try to be brief from here on. Albert Bandura, a well-known psychologist, many years ago, in 1982, wrote an article called The Psychology of Chance Encounters. And he said to me the most brilliant explanation for how people get recruited into cults that I've ever heard. He said, it's bad luck. And what he meant by that was, the vast majority of us go through periods of transition where we're questioning ourselves, the people around us, our loved ones, our basic belief systems, etc., etc. Almost everyone goes through that. Anyone who's a thoughtful person will go through that kind of stage, often several times in my life or in your life. Where bad luck comes into play is, if I'm in that stage, do I run into a cult recruiter or not? That's where the luck factor comes into play. If I run into a cult recruiter, most of us, of course, don't run into cult recruiters. We manage that transition in any way we can, and we move on. That's what happens for most of us. But for an unfortunate few, at that time when they're vulnerable, that's when they run into a cult recruiter. Of course, social media and the internet has actually greatly facilitated that. Idealistic goals and dissatisfaction with the state of the world. The people that I've met who become involved in cults are the most idealistic people around. They want to do good. They want to improve life. They want to improve people. These are, they are essentially really good people who become involved in these groups. For some people, it's loneliness. It's a way of establishing and maintaining contacts. For some people, it's a way to handle a severe loss that they've had. For some people, it plays to their ego. I'm special. I'm a member of this group that it's a singular group in the world. It's a singular group in human history. So therefore, I am actually a pretty special guy. Most people don't really like uncertainty. Most people don't like confusion or doubt. And these groups will provide a way of getting away from that. For some folks, it's a rebellious thing, right? They're rebelling against maybe the religion that they're brought up in, or they're rebelling against their parents, or whatever. And for a lot of people, it's a genuine spiritual search. They really are looking for some form of spiritual enlightenment. There's a buzz that we get, that folks get when they are recruited into culture groups, and that can almost be addictive. Vicarious celebrity, I'm a Scientologist. I know Tom Cruise, right? That's not true. I don't know Tom Cruise. I'm not a Scientologist either. The leader may be highly attractive, both intellectually and at times physically, especially with most cults are led by men. The vast majority are male-dominated. There are some that are led by women, and almost always you'll find those women, at least at one point, were highly attractive. It's a way of escaping from freedom. Freedom is hard to deal with. For health reasons, to stop using drugs. I've run into a lot of people who say, well, I was a drug addict before I was involved in this group or that group, and they cured me. To escape abusive families. For work reasons, right? Especially in marketing-oriented cults, for example, and also because of relationships. I have a good friend. My friends became involved in this group. My wife is my husband. My parents, my children, whatever, may be involved in this. And as I mentioned before, bad luck is the central factor, unfortunately. At least that's. I think Albert Bandura is really onto something very wise there. Why do people stay? Well, they continue to believe in the person who's leading the group or in the helper. They want to protect their investment. I've spent 20 years in this group. You want me to leave now? I invested my adult life in that group. They may want to hold on to family. All right, this is very true for people who are born into groups where they don't want to leave it, because if they leave, they're not just leaving the group, they're leaving their entire family. and their family's going to disown them, disfellowship them, or in some other way act as though they no longer exist. Relationships with cults absolutely can be real and solid. There's no question about it. For some, it's a matter of pride and embarrassment. Especially for most people think that, to be involved in a cult, there's something wrong with you. You've got a mental illness or some sort of psychological problem, you're not very smart, you're very gullible. All of these are utterly inaccurate and they are myths. But nevertheless, most people feel that way, and imagine yourself talking to somebody who you just met, and they say, hey, so what do you do? And you tell them what you do. They say, well, tell me a little bit about your background. And you're like, well, for 20 years I was in a cult. That may be a little embarrassing for a lot of people. Fear, right? They're afraid to leave the group for a lot of various reasons. And what Steve Hassan has referred to, and we now often refer to as exiting costs. What's the price of leaving the group? Do I lose my family? Do I lose my money? Do I lose my house, my profession, my social status, etc.? What do I lose by leaving this group? Why believe, or why do people leave? I want to be clear about this. The vast majority who leave cultic groups do so on their own. They are not deprogrammed, they're not exit counseled. Typically something happens that is just so grossly discordant with their concept of the group that they leave. A lot of them kicked out. All right, they're booted out because they're rebellious, or because in some way the group has labeled you a failure. Now you gotta understand this, all right, especially with religious cults. If a religious cult recruiter comes up to me, and I've not heard of that group, I've not been exposed to that group, I may be outside of the group and therefore some version of a heathen. However, it's because I'm ignorant. I haven't been exposed to the truth yet. If, on the other hand, I've been exposed to the truth, I've been a member of the group, and now I reject it, I don't have any excuse anymore. I'm bad. I'm evil. Ignorance is no longer an excuse for me. Sometimes it's a trusted person with whom they can confide. That's why we often encourage people, if you have a family member or friend who's involved in a cultic group, at almost all costs, try to maintain a relationship with them. Disillusionment. The group claims the world's going to come to an end on February 29th, and it doesn't happen. Or you discover, I investigated one group many years ago in Philadelphia about walking on the name now. It'll come back to me. It was basically a somewhat Islamic-oriented cultic group, and the leader of that group, I managed to get into. He was sick at the time, he was pretty ill at that time, and eventually died. But I managed to get up into his room, his private room, where the hierarchy was there. I just basically snuck up in there, just pretending I knew what I was doing. And it was interesting. I found the leader. You know what his favorite TV program was? Charlie's Angels. There's a real spiritual connection. Seeing that in your cult leader may spark disillusionment for some people. For some, it's personality conflicts. You just don't fit in. For others, it's boredom. The excitement is over. That initial buzz you got when you first became involved, now it's day-to-day drudgery. Media exposure. You find, you hear things in the media that begin to become difficult to deny. And whatever rationalizations you may have built up as a member of the cult, it eventually collapses. That's one of the reasons. Those are some of the major reasons why people leave groups. As you notice, none of those reasons had to do with deprogramming or exit counseling or anything like that. Those folks we refer to as walkaways. These are people who just walk away from the group. They are vulnerable to another group. That's one of the big issues. Often they've left the group feeling that there's something wrong with them, or that they just haven't found the right group or the right messiah, and so they may be vulnerable to another group. We found that our research has found that cultic and other high demand groups, high control groups, vary enormously in their potential for harm. And of course, as I noted in the earlier, in the beginning of my talk, that harm can obviously include death. Harm can be physical, psychological, economic. I love it. I don't get asked this anymore. I've done a lot of court cases, and I don't typically get asked when or the other side no longer insinuates to me that I'm in this for the money. There's one common characteristic that people have who leave cultic groups, no matter what the group is. They are broke. The group has their money, their assets, etc. The idea that Bill Goldberg or Warner Goldberg or myself or anyone else is in this field for the money is just ridiculous. And I guess attorneys have finally figured that out, and I no longer get asked that question. Because when they ask me that, I love answering. Because all it does is reinforce my testimony that this is an abusive group. So it's great when they ask me that, but it doesn't happen that much anymore. Social harm, of course, isolating you from friends and family, from your people in your past, etc. And of course, spiritual abuse. And for a lot of folks, that's really core. That's really central to why people will leave a group, because they come to the conclusion that what they're experiencing, they sought spiritual enlightenment, and what they got was spiritual abuse. What are some of the things that elicit concern among people, typically family members or close friends of somebody who's been recruited into a group? Well, the first and foremost is out-of-character behavioral changes. The person seems to have changed very quickly. Sometimes that change on the surface looks very positive, right? I've been drinking, smoking weed, and snorting coke all my life, and now I've stopped, period. I didn't go to AA or NA, I didn't go to rehab, I just stopped. Very sudden change, and a positive one, at least on the surface. Black and white thinking. The person, the family member who used to be able to sort of think in a more nuanced way, you can consider both sides of the story, now it's either good or bad, black or white. Secrecy. Their lives become a secret. In psychotherapy calls, all of a sudden, a common dynamic will be, I'm in a psychotherapy call, my wife wants to know, what's going on in therapy, and I say, you're crossing my boundaries, that's very dysfunctional. I start using psychodabble as a way of, in other words, I'm using the way my group has loaded the language so that codependency now becomes isolation from everyone, and dependency only on the group, all right? I'm advised very strongly. In fact, in groups like Nixian, you have to sign, or in LifeSpring and other groups, you have to sign a contract stating that you will not tell anyone what goes on in this group. And it's going to be illegally binding and a major issue if you violate that. Lack of contact. Your loved one all of a sudden kind of disappears. They're not around anymore. Symbols. In other words, use of symbols that is strange. And what does this mean? Why are you tattooing this on yourself, etc. A reaction of a child. All right. In other words, I become involved in a cult, and my child, my usually older child, begins to react very differently toward me. Major change of goals. This is a family that I worked with for many years. There's very, very bright son, full scholarship to I think it might have even been Vanderbilt, if I remember correctly, right around this year. Full scholarship at Vanderbilt, and he's going to become an engineer. He got recruited by Scientology, quit college after his first year, and that's it. I mean, he works basically fairly menial jobs, and he's just a brilliant, well, not so much of a young man anymore, but he's clearly from his past, he's clearly a very brilliant guy. But his goals in life, his goal was to become an engineer. He was sort of idealistic. He wanted to become a civil engineer that would, repair infrastructure and that sort of thing. But now his goal, of course, is to clear the planet. For everyone on the planet be a Scientologist. What makes communication difficult? Well, normal protective instincts can be counterproductive. In other words, one of the first things I tell people, family members especially, is no, don't tell your loved one you're in a cult. All right? That is counterproductive. All right? They're going to give you all kinds of reasons why they're, number one, why they're not in a cult, and number two, why you've been brainwashed into thinking that they're in a cult. So they turn your argument completely against you. Being alarmed, being overly alarmed, can elicit intense emotion. But the situation usually calls for restraint, discipline, control, and vigilant awareness. Very difficult, especially if your loved one is in a group that has a history of violence and abuse. In those there are situations where I think extraordinary means may be necessary. If I had a child who was was a follower of Jim Jones and was talking to me about moving to Guyana, I might not take such a slow approach to dealing with that particular person. And conversion involves a change in worldview, Think about somebody who may have been heading toward a career in science, who now all of a sudden believes that there are demons that possess people, and what you do now affects your ancestors, not only your future, your children, grandchildren, etc., but it even affects your ancestors back in the spirit world. They're now being punished because of your current behaviors. So what a radical change in worldview from someone who, prior to that, was pretty hardcore science. I'm going to, given the time, I'm going to kind of skip through this, but I just would like you to know that there are a number of potential precursors to conversion. Current worldview is not really delivering, it's not really doing what you want it to. Sometimes people become very open for various reasons to a range of worldviews in what some refer to as sort of a spiritual marketplace. Go to a college campus, right, during orientation or during those days where they have campus activities, everyone's got a table out and they're recruiting people to, the German club or, the theater group, this or that, and the other thing. And sure enough, you'll have a whole range of quote-unquote religious groups on campus. And they'll have their, it literally is a smorgasbord that folks can get involved with if they want to. So they can literally shop in the spiritual marketplace. Particular worldview may not fit one's needs. So for example, and I hear this a lot, people who are raised in mainstream Christian churches, and it's boring, it's tiring, it's all the usual soap opera stuff is going on, and blah blah blah. I need to be involved with something that's alive, that's active, that's thrilling and exciting, and fervent. Sometimes a compelling inner experience can rattle one's axioms and open one up to transformation. Back in the 60s, cults began to get noticed, really. Not that they began, they've been around forever, but they began to get noticed primarily in the 1960s and the 1970s, and there are reasons for that that are probably better explained by economics and social forces, things like that. But the fact of the matter is that for a lot of people who became involved in cults at that time, they'd experimented with psychedelics. And they were open to all kinds of strange experiences as a result of their experimentation with LSD and psilocybin and things like that. Of course, once you're involved in a group, the group will reinforce and encourage you to accept this new worldview. And of course, your behavior then, if you change your behavior, that will then reinforce your belief systems, and your belief systems will then reinforce your behavior. So there's kind of a feedback loop there. Practice makes perfect, even in the cult world. And we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm absolutely happy to entertain some questions or comments, preferably not condemnations.
Thanks for that presentation.
Excuse me, is it on or? There we go.
Yep, okay. Thanks for the presentation. It was fabulous. But I was sitting here and thinking about, have you ever heard of the House of David?
Of what?
The House of David.
Yes.
In Benton Harbor, Michigan?
I'm sorry?
Benton Harbor, Michigan?
I'm familiar with. I've not worked with anyone there, but I've heard of it.
They've sold everything now. They're taking out the houses and stuff. That's kind of like what I was thinking about, so the 30s, I think it was the 1930s is when they built up the farms. Anyway, could you speak to the family?
Right, which group are you talking about? The former Children of God or the family in Australia
No, the family,
or New Zealand?
in the United States. There's a really good Netflix
Prayer breakfast.
program on, is it the
Prayer
family?
breakfast.
The Brotherhood?
I've
Prayer
not seen,
breakfast,
I've not
the
seen
prayer
it.
breakfast.
And I'm not sure if I'm referring to the same group.
Okay,
When
no,
the
this-
family to me is what used to be a group headed by Moses Berg, known as the Children of God, and they're all over the world.
This is different.
Yeah, these people, I guess, are all over the world. They have a house here. Somebody speaking to
That
this?
might be the same group then,
Okay, but they're very involved in politics.
yeah.
Okay. we must be
Yeah,
on
no,
the same
that's, I mean, a lot of groups, Unification Church was extremely involved in politics, and so was Scientology.
Hi, you said that Daesh is a pejorative?
Daesh
What
is
does it
used,
actually mean?
it's Arabic, so I couldn't tell you. All I can tell you is that that is a term that's used in the Middle East by Arabs opposing the group, and it is a pejorative term because apparently it has two meanings. One meaning is very nice, lovely, servant of God or something like that, and the other is something like pig dirt or something, but it's very derogatory. And so that's typically the term that's used by a lot of folks in the national intelligence agencies will also be referred to as Daesh. In my opinion, it's just more accurate, and I like it. I like to, if I can take a little dig out of them, I will do so.
I just wanted to thank the International Cultic Studies Association. I was given a scholarship in 2015 or 16 for a year to be a member of it, and it has helped me get out of basically a lot of cultic relationships and cultic situations. So, you being the president of that, I just wanted to thank you guys. So.
Thank you. I get paid a lot to do this. That'll be zero.
Okay, so I can tell just reading that you studied a lot and done a lot of work, and I'm sorry that I'm just learning about you and all your work today, but I was very curious when you talked about like infiltrating or like going, have you done that much? Were you ever, you were never like part of a group or indoctrinated to a group, but you would almost like undercover, like what was that like?
I haven't done it in many, many years. I'm just too old and I'm too expensive at this point. But years ago, yeah, I 3 or 4 groups that I don't know if infiltrated is quite the right word. It's not like I pretended to join or anything. I just attended their meetings and talked to people. And in the case of the one group I mentioned earlier, just managed to weasel my way into. I went to a lot of meetings and I managed to weasel my way into the room where the leader was. So that typically did not happen.
So I actually grew up in Delaware, and so I'm wondering.
You have my sympathy.
I'm wondering if you've seen any groups, particularly come out of Delaware, because I was born into a cultic fundamentalist Christian.
Let me be clear about something. At any given time in this country, the best estimate is that there may be anywhere from 10 to 50,000 cultic groups. Most of them are very small. A lot of them come and go. Some will be absorbed by other groups, or some will, they'll change their leader, gets kicked out or dies, whatever, they change. So I don't even try to follow, the number of groups around. I'm definitely aware that there are cultic groups in Delaware. They typically are, if you know Delaware, 3 counties, very small state. Most of these groups are located in Kent, Sussex County. That's what I referred earlier to as our own little Bible Belt. And they're typically more individual churches and individual pastors that are cultic, that sort of thing. So they certainly exist. I'm working right now with a young woman who from Delaware, whose father was a self-described pastor, had his own congregations, independent, quote unquote, and he trafficked her sexually, and he traffics a lot of people. Getting hardcore proof is really, really difficult. He's very smart, But, that was a Delaware-based group.
There's a group here in Nashville that,
Okay,
I'm sure.
so am I.
But there's a group here in Nashville that I was thinking about. It's called Padre de Sufrir. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. Or Stop Suffering. And it's Brazilian.
Mm-hmm.
Comes from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very cultic. I saw a family, well, not a family, a family member of somebody that goes there.
Yeah.
And he described a lot of this stuff that you were talking about. And they showed movies of people that left the cult or the religion,
Mm-hmm.
and they were killed in car accidents and stuff like that.
Yeah, again, Steve, I give Steve Hassan a lot of credit for this, although many people talk about it, but he kind of nailed it in one phrase. He said, cults induce phobias. Okay? And what I mean by that is they all predict all kinds of horrible things that are going to happen to you if you leave the group. Again, there's a difference between someone like me, who may not have been exposed to that group or that leader. I'm just ignorant. Whereas you've been exposed. You know the leader, and you left. You're going to be punished. Okay? You've rejected it. I'm just unaware of the truth. You've rejected the truth actively. And so all kinds of horrible things are going to happen to you. And of course, in real life, bad things do happen, okay? So I've worked with a number of people who left cult groups who went through a period of extreme sexual activity or were involved with, became involved with alcohol or drugs or whatever. And, the group will say, see, told you, that's gonna happen because you've rejected God or whatever. But of course, no, that's not what happens to the vast majority of people. They struggle, absolutely. That's a whole other topic. But it's not because they left the truth. It's because they've left a cult.
And they also had to invest a lot of money. Like if you want a prayer, then you have to invest and give and time and buy stuff. And it was a husband who left his wife in there, and the wife didn't want to get out. And they were trying to make them get a divorce so they can get a new husband.
I wrote a book chapter actually on custody evaluations where one parent's still involved in a cultic group. It's really, it's just tragic. I'll just leave it at that for now.
I think we have time for just one more question.
You've spoken about very small groups for the most part.
Yes.
On a political level, historically and contemporaneously, many of the things on your chart of behaviors could be tied to political movements. How much should our guard be up when we see behaviors as you outlined happening on a mass level?
I'm not sure how to answer that other than to say that, your guard should be up. The most famous, there are two very famous examples of political cults. And they started off as political cults that became among the worst tragedies of the 20th century. I'm referring to, first of all, the Nazi Party, which started off as a political cult. And I'm also referring to the Lenin-Stalin branch of communism, which also, and Mao Zedong, absolutely, was a cult leader, basically. But he took over a country. And a nuclear armed country at that. So, there's no question in my mind that cultic dynamics, obviously they can exist just between two people, but they can also exist in an entire country.
It's trying to stay in conversation with somebody who appears to be participating in one of those movements.
As long as they don't threaten my life or liberty, yeah. There's a big difference between me conversing with somebody who's involved in the Lenin LaRouche group versus being in Germany in 1936 and confronting a Nazi Party member. That's a little bit more dangerous.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.